My name is Seraphina Hayes, and I'm 28 years old. Last Tuesday, I sat in my grandfather's lawyer's office watching my parents snicker as the attorney announced my generous $10 inheritance. Mom actually covered her mouth to hide her laughter while Dad shook his head in mock disappointment. "Typical Grandpa Joe," Mom whispered, "always the joker, even in death." But their amusement died instantly when the lawyer slid a sealed envelope across the mahogany table with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. Inside that letter was a truth so devastating it would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty, expose 28 years of lies, and ultimately destroy the very people who thought they'd won. Before we dive into this wild ride of family secrets and sweet revenge, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if you're ready for a story that'll make you question everything you think you know about blood being thicker than water, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what my grandfather revealed in that letter. It's going to blow your mind, just like it blew mine. Growing up in the Hayes household was like living in a carefully orchestrated performance where I was always the understudy. My parents, Margaret and Richard Hayes, were prominent figures in our small Connecticut town. She ran the historical society he owned, the largest insurance agency in 3 counties. They lived in a pristine colonial house with perfectly manicured lawns and dinner parties every other Friday. Then there was me, their disappointment wrapped in designer clothes they bought to maintain appearances. While my cousins excelled in everything from lacrosse to piano recitals, I struggled with dyslexia and preferred spending time in Grandpa Joe's workshop learning to restore antique furniture. My parents made it clear through 1,000 small cuts that I wasn't meeting their expectations. "Seraphina's going through a phase," Mom would tell her friends when I chose woodworking over cotillion. "We're hoping she'll find her direction soon." Grandpa Joe was my sanctuary. Joseph Marcus Hayes was a self-made man who'd built a small construction empire from nothing, starting with a single truck and endless determination. While my parents lived off his success, he remained grounded, wearing the same flannel shirts and work boots that had carried him through decades of honest labor. His house smelled like sawdust and coffee, and his workshop was where I learned that my hands could create beautiful things, even if my mind processed words differently. "You've got the gift, Sera," he'd say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "Your parents don't understand that success isn't just about following their predetermined path. Sometimes, the most valuable people are the ones who see the world differently." Every Sunday, our extended family gathered at Grandpa's for dinner. My parents would arrive with my cousins, the golden children who made Dean's List, won scholarships, and chose careers that looked impressive on Christmas cards. Jessica was a pediatric surgeon, Marcus, a corporate lawyer, and Elena, a successful architect. They were everything my parents wanted in children, and they weren't shy about the comparisons. Jessica just bought her second house. Mom would announce proudly, though, Jessica wasn't even her daughter, and Marcus is being considered for partner at his firm. Meanwhile, I was working at a small furniture restoration shop, making barely enough to cover my studio apartment rent. My parents treated my work like a hobby they tolerated until I came to my senses. The dynamic became more pointed after I dropped out of college. I'd struggled through 2 years of business school fighting my dyslexia and my complete lack of interest in corporate finance. When I finally admitted I wanted to pursue furniture restoration full-time, the disappointment in my parents' eyes was palpable. They stopped mentioning me in their social conversations, stopped asking about my work, and stopped pretending I was part of their 5-year plan for family success. Grandpa Joe, however, became more supportive than ever. He started sending me business, referring wealthy clients who appreciated quality restoration work. He'd visit my workshop monthly, examining my latest projects with the critical eye of someone who understood craftsmanship. "You're building something real here, Sarah," he'd say, running his weathered hands over a desk I'd restored. "Something that'll outlast all their paper achievements." But family dinners remained awkward affairs, where I sat quietly while my parents basked in my cousin's accomplishments. They'd discuss Jessica's latest research publication or Marcus's high-profile cases, while I ate silently, feeling like an observer in my own family. The message was clear. I was the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when you didn't follow the prescribed path to success. The last conversation I had with Grandpa Joe was 3 weeks before he died. He'd called me to his house, which was unusual since he typically visited my workshop. He seemed different that day, more serious, almost urgent. We sat in his kitchen drinking coffee while he asked detailed questions about my business, my plans, my dreams. He wanted to know if I was happy, if I felt fulfilled, if I ever regretted not finishing college. "Grandpa, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I told him honestly. "I wake up excited to work on beautiful pieces. I'm building something meaningful." He nodded slowly, studying my face. "Good. That's what I needed to hear." Then he said something that puzzled me at the time. "Sarah, promise me something. When the time comes, don't let them make you feel small. You're worth more than they've ever realized." 2 weeks later, he had a massive heart attack while working in his garden. By the time the paramedics arrived, Joseph Marcus Hayes was gone, taking with him the only person who'd ever truly believed in me. The funeral was a spectacle worthy of my parents' social standing. Half the town attended, filling the Methodist church with flowers and hollow condolences. My parents orchestrated every detail, from the eulogy to the reception, positioning themselves as the grieving children who'd carry on Grandpa's legacy. They spoke about his business acumen, his community contributions, his role as the family patriarch. I sat in the front pew wearing the only black dress I owned, listening to them rewrite history. They painted themselves as devoted children who'd learned everything from their father, conveniently omitting years of arguments about money, lifestyle choices, and their treatment of me. When Dad spoke about Grandpa's values of hard work and family loyalty, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing bitterly. After the service, relatives I barely knew approached me with sympathetic smiles and comments about how I must be devastated to lose my grandfather's guidance. What they didn't understand was that Grandpa Joe had been more than guidance. He'd been my lifeline in a family that treated me like an inconvenient accident. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday. At Morrison Blake & Associates, the prestigious law firm that had handled Grandpa's affairs for 30 years. I almost didn't attend. My parents had made it clear they expected nothing dramatic. Grandpa had always been straightforward about money, and they assumed the bulk of his estate would be divided among his children with token amounts for the grandchildren. "It's just a formality," Seraphina Mom said when I asked about the meeting. "Your grandfather was very practical about these things. We'll probably each get a small memorial gift, and then we can all move forward." The law office was everything you'd expect from a firm serving Connecticut's wealthy elite: dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and an atmosphere of quiet authority. James Morrison, the senior partner who'd known Grandpa for decades, greeted us with the appropriate mixture of professionalism and sympathy. My parents arrived in their funeral best confident and composed. My cousins attended virtually via video call, checking in from their important lives in Boston and New York. Morrison began with the standard legal language, explaining the probate process and confirming Grandpa's mental competency when the will was drafted. Then he started reading the specific bequests. To my Aunt Carol, Grandpa left his antique watch collection and $50,000. To my Uncle Robert, the vintage car collection and another $50,000. My parents received the house along with $150,000 each. My cousins each received their graduate school loans paid off. Substantial amounts that would free them from debt and accelerate their already successful careers. Jessica's medical school loans, Marcus's law school debt, Elena's architecture program costs, all wiped clean with a stroke of Grandpa's pen. Then Morrison paused, consulting his notes before looking directly at me. To my granddaughter, Seraphina Hayes, I leave the sum of $10. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt heat rush to my cheeks as my parents exchanged glances. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably while Mom pressed her lips together in what might have been embarrassment or secondhand humiliation. $10, Mom whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you sure that's correct? Morrison nodded gravely. The amount is specifically stated as $10, along with the note, for her excellent judgment in life choices. That's when my parents lost their composure. Dad snorted first, trying to cover it with a cough. Mom's shoulders began shaking with suppressed laughter. The absurdity of the situation. Their disappointment of a daughter receiving exactly $10 while everyone else got substantial gifts struck them as the perfect punctuation to my role in the family hierarchy. Typical dad, Mom murmured to my father, not bothering to lower her voice. Always had a sense of humor, even about serious things. At least he was honest about expectations, Dad replied, and they both chuckled softly. I sat frozen in my chair, feeling smaller than I'd felt since childhood. The $10 felt like a public confirmation of my worth in Grandpa's eyes, despite all our conversations about my value and potential. Had I misunderstood our relationship? Had he been humoring me all these years while secretly sharing my parents' disappointment? My cousins' faces on the video screen reflected a mixture of sympathy and awkwardness. They'd received life-changing gifts while I got what amounted to a cosmic joke. The disparity was so extreme, it felt deliberately cruel. Morrison cleared his throat again, and the room's attention returned to him. However, he continued reaching into his briefcase. There is one additional item. He withdrew a cream-colored envelope, thick and heavy, with my name written across the front in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. The envelope was sealed with red wax, bearing the impression of his signet ring. Mr. Hayes left specific instructions that this letter be given to Seraphina Hayes immediately following the reading of the monetary bequests. Morrison explained, sliding the envelope across the polished table toward me. My parents' laughter died instantly. The casual amusement vanished from their faces, replaced by curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like concern. Why would Grandpa leave me a letter but only $10? What could be so important that it required this theatrical presentation? My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than I'd expected, and I could feel something besides paper inside. The wax seal bore the Hayes family crest that Grandpa had commissioned years ago. A tree with deep roots and wide branches symbolizing strength and legacy. Should I read it now? I asked Morrison, aware that everyone in the room was staring at me. The instructions specified that you should read it privately, he replied. However, Mr. Stare, Hayes did indicate that after you've read the contents, you may choose to share information with the family at your discretion. The phrase, at your discretion, hung in the air like a challenge. My parents were clearly dying to know what the letter contained, but Morrison's formal language made it clear that this was my decision to make. I stood up carefully, clutching the envelope against my chest. I think I'll read this at home, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Of course, Morrison nodded. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions about the contents or need assistance with any legal matters that might arise. The way he emphasized legal matters sent a chill down my spine. What could Grandpa have written that would require legal assistance? I drove home in a daze, the envelope sitting on my passenger seat like a ticking bomb. Every red light gave me another moment to wonder what my grandfather had written, what secret he'd saved for after his death. The weight of the envelope suggested multiple pages, and something else. something small and hard that shifted when I'd picked it up. My studio apartment felt smaller than usual as I sat on my secondhand couch, turning the envelope over in my hands. The wax seal was perfect, unbroken, waiting for me to crack it open and discover whatever truth Grandpa Joe had hidden for 28 years. I broke the seal, carefully preserving the wax impression out of some inexplicable reverence. Inside, I found 3 items: a handwritten letter on Grandpa's personal stationery, a small brass key, and a bank statement that made my heart stop. The letter was written in his careful script, the handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and workshop notes for years. But this was different. More formal, more deliberate, as if every word had been chosen with precise intention. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've just endured what I suspect was a humiliating experience at Morrison's office. I'm sorry for that, but it was necessary for what comes next. The $10 wasn't an insult. It was a signal. You see, sweetheart, everything else I left your parents and cousins came from money that was never really mine to give. I need to tell you a story about your parents that will be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth about the people who raised you and why they've always treated you as less than. 28 years ago, your mother was desperate. She and your father had been trying to conceive for 5 years, spending money they didn't have on fertility treatments and specialists. Their marriage was falling apart under the stress, and your mother had convinced herself that a baby would fix everything. When traditional medicine failed, she became obsessed with alternative treatments, expensive procedures, anything that promised hope. That's when she came to me with a proposal that shocked me to my core. She wanted to borrow against her inheritance. Specifically, she wanted me to mortgage the family business to pay for experimental fertility treatments in Switzerland. We're talking about $200,000, Sarah. Money I didn't have without risking everything I'd built. I refused. I told her that desperation was making her reckless, that bankrupting the family business wouldn't guarantee them a child, and that they needed to consider other options like adoption. Your mother was furious. She accused me of not caring about her happiness, of being selfish with money that would eventually be theirs anyway. 3 months later, she announced she was pregnant with you. I was thrilled, of course, but something felt off. The timeline was wrong, and your mother's behavior during the pregnancy was strange, secretive, almost defensive. When you were born, I had my suspicions, but I kept them to myself because you were perfect and you were ours. But Sarah, honey, you need to know the truth. Your parents never conceived naturally. Your mother used my business credit and forged my signature to fund those Swiss treatments without my knowledge. She stole from me, from our family, to pay for the procedure that resulted in your birth. When I discovered the unauthorized charges months later, she begged me not to expose her. She promised she'd pay everything back, swore it was a loan she'd intended to ask for formally. I should have turned her in then. The amount of money involved was substantial enough to constitute a felony. But you were 6 months old, and I couldn't bear the thought of you growing up with a mother in prison. So I kept quiet, absorbed the debt, and spent the next 28 years watching them benefit from their theft while treating you like an unwanted burden. Here's what really breaks my heart, sweetheart. They've resented you from the moment you were born, not because you disappointed them, but because you represent the evidence of your mother's crime. Every time they look at you, they're reminded of what she did, of the money they stole, of the lies they've built their lives on. They've made you feel worthless because you make them feel guilty. The attached bank statement shows the true balance of my personal savings account, the money I accumulated separately from the business they stole from. The account number is 847-293-1057, and the brass key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank box number 1247. Inside that box, you'll find documents proving everything I've told you along with other items I've saved for you. Sarah, you are not their biological disappointment. You are the child they wanted so desperately they committed a crime to have you. The irony is that in trying to save face by hiding their theft, they've spent your entire life making you pay for their guilt and shame. The business, the house, the money I left them in the will, it all came from rebuilding what they stole from me. Every dollar of their inheritance is money I earned twice, first before they took it, and again after I had to start over. They've been living off my forgiveness for 28 years, and they never even had the grace to be grateful. Now it's your turn to decide what to do with this information. The documents in the safety deposit box include the original forged credit applications, bank records, and a detailed accounting of every dollar they stole. You have enough evidence to file charges if you choose. The statute of limitations has passed for most of it, but there are some financial crimes that don't expire, especially when there's been ongoing concealment. More importantly, you have the power to expose them for who they really are. They've spent years making you feel small while building their reputation on stolen money and lies. Every dinner party, every social event, every moment they've acted superior to you has been funded by their crime against me. I'm giving you this choice because you're the only one who truly understood what I was trying to build. Something honest, something real, something that lasts. You have my character, Sarah, not theirs. Whatever you decide to do with this information, I trust your judgment completely. You are worth everything, my dear granddaughter. Don't let anyone ever convince you otherwise. All my love, Grandpa Joe P.S. Check the safety deposit box carefully. I left you something that belonged to your great-grandmother, along with the deed to the workshop property. It was never part of the family business they damaged, so it was always mine to give. You'll never have to worry about losing your sanctuary. I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pages steady. 28 years of feeling inadequate. 28 years of watching my parents favor my cousins. 28 years of believing I was the family disappointment. And it was all because I was living proof of my mother's crime. The bank statement showed a balance of $847,000, $847,000 that my parents had no idea existed. Money that Grandpa had earned after they'd stolen from him, money he'd hidden and saved and left specifically for me. I need to pause here for a moment because I can barely believe what happened next. If you're anything like me, you're probably feeling that same mix of rage and vindication that was coursing through my veins. Have you ever discovered that your whole life was built on someone else's lie? Let me know in the comments how you'd handle finding out your family stole money to have you then spent your entire life making you feel worthless for existing. And if this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me to tell it, make sure you're subscribed, because this is just the beginning of how everything unraveled. The brass key felt warm in my palm as I sat there processing the magnitude of what Grandpa had revealed. My parents weren't just disappointing, they were criminals. They'd stolen from their own father, and when I was born as a result of that theft, they'd spent my entire life punishing me for their guilt. But more than the money, more than the crime, what broke my heart was understanding why I'd always felt like an outsider in my own family. It wasn't because I was dyslexic, or because I chose woodworking over college, or because I didn't meet their social expectations. It was because every time they looked at me, they saw evidence of the worst thing they'd ever done. I drove to the bank in a trance, clutching the key and bank statement like talismans. The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, and when the bank employee left me alone to examine the contents, I discovered that Grandpa had been meticulous in his documentation. There were copies of the original credit applications with my mother's forged signature bank statements showing the unauthorized transactions, and a timeline Grandpa had created detailing every aspect of their deception. He'd also included photos, pictures of my mother and father that I'd never seen before, taken during their desperate fertility treatment phase. In them, they looked haggard, desperate, nothing like the confident social leaders I'd grown up knowing. But the most devastating evidence was a letter my mother had written to Grandpa after I was born, promising to repay the money and begging him not to expose her crime. In her own handwriting, she admitted to forging his signature and using his business credit for personal expenses. She wrote about how sorry she was, how she never meant to hurt him, how she just wanted a baby so desperately that she'd lost all perspective. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a jewelry box that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Inside, I found a stunning pearl necklace and a deed to the workshop property, the building where I'd spent countless hours learning my craft, the place that had always felt more like home than my parents' house. Grandpa had given me more than money. He'd given me the truth evidence and the power to decide what to do with it all. I spent 3 days absorbing the reality of what I'd discovered before I could even begin to think clearly about next steps. The workshop felt different now that I knew it was mine. Not just a place Grandpa let me use, but property he'd deliberately preserved for me, separate from the family business my parents had damaged. The first thing I did was call Morrison. When I explained that I needed to discuss the contents of Grandpa's letter, he scheduled an immediate appointment. Sitting in his office with the evidence spread across his desk, I watched the veteran attorney's expression grow increasingly grim. "Your grandfather was thorough," Morrison said, examining the forged documents through a magnifying glass. "These credit applications would have been sufficient for criminal charges when they were first submitted. The fact that he documented everything suggests he was considering legal action." "Why didn't he pursue it?" I asked. Morrison leaned back in his leather chair, considering his words carefully. "Joseph was protective of you above all else. He knew that exposing your mother's crime when you were a baby would have destroyed your childhood, but he also knew that someday you'd need to understand why your parents treated you the way they did." What are my options now? Legally, the statute of limitations has expired for most financial crimes of this nature. However, bank fraud and identity theft can be prosecuted up to 10 years after discovery, not just from when the crime occurred. Since your grandfather kept this information private, you could argue the crimes were only recently discovered. The implications were staggering. I could potentially file criminal charges against my own mother. But more realistically, I had enough evidence to destroy their reputation and expose the foundation of lies their entire social standing was built on. Morrison continued, "You also have civil options. The money they stole plus interest and damages could be recovered through a lawsuit. But honestly, Seraphina, the most powerful weapon you have is simply the truth. Your parents have built their lives on the pretense that they're upstanding citizens. This evidence would obliterate that image." I left Morrison's office with my mind spinning. The power to destroy my parents' lives was literally in my hands, but I needed to decide if that's what I wanted. Part of me craved revenge. After 28 years of being made to feel inferior, the idea of exposing them as frauds was incredibly appealing. But another part of me wondered if simply walking away with my inheritance and the truth would be enough. That evening, I called my oldest friend Maya, who'd witnessed years of my family dynamics. When I told her what I'd discovered, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "Sarah, they stole from your grandfather and then spent your entire life making you feel like garbage for existing. They don't deserve your mercy. But if I expose them, it won't just affect them. Dad's business could be ruined. Mom's position in the community would be destroyed. There would be collateral damage." "Good," Maya said bluntly. "Maybe there should be consequences for treating their own daughter like a burden while living off stolen money. You don't owe them protection after what they've put you through." But I needed more than righteous anger to guide my decision. I spent the next few days researching my parents' current financial situation, their business interests, their social commitments. What I discovered was illuminating. Dad's insurance agency was thriving, built on the reputation he'd cultivated as a trustworthy community leader. Mom's role in the historical society had evolved into a paid consulting position for wealthy families preserving local properties. They'd leveraged Grandpa's stolen money into a lifestyle that positioned them as pillars of the community. Meanwhile, I'd struggled for years to build my restoration business, taking out loans and working overtime to afford basic equipment. Every tool in my workshop, every technique I'd learned, every client I'd gained had been earned through my own effort. While they'd built their success on a foundation of theft and lies, I'd built mine through honest work. The contrast crystallized my decision. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. They'd stolen money, committed fraud, and then punished me my entire life for existing as evidence of their crime. They deserved to face consequences, but more importantly, I deserved to reclaim my power in this family dynamic. I began planning carefully. Simply showing up at the next family dinner and dropping this bombshell wouldn't be enough. I wanted them to understand not just what they'd done, but how it had affected me and what it was going to cost them going forward. My plan started with documentation. Using Grandpa's evidence, I created a comprehensive timeline of their crime and its aftermath. I included photos of the forged documents, copies of the unauthorized transactions, and excerpts from my mother's confession letter. I had everything professionally bound into a presentation that looked like a legal brief. Next, I researched the key people in their social and professional circles, the clients who trusted Dad's integrity, the historical society board members who respected Mom's expertise, the country club friends who saw them as upstanding citizens. These were people who'd built relationships with my parents based on a carefully constructed image of respectability. I also reached out to my cousins individually. Jessica, Marcus, and Elena deserved to know the truth about where their grandfather's money had really come from. They'd all benefited from the family wealth that my parents had stolen, and they needed to understand that their advantages had come at the cost of their grandfather's trust and my childhood happiness. The conversations with my cousins were eye-opening. None of them had questioned why I was always treated differently, but when I explained the real reason, they all admitted they'd noticed the disparity. Jessica, the pediatric surgeon, was particularly upset. I always wondered why Uncle Richard and Aunt Margaret seemed so resentful toward you, she said during our phone call. I thought maybe it was just disappointment about college, but this explains so much more. Marcus, the lawyer, offered to help me navigate any legal proceedings I might want to pursue. What they did was serious, Sarah. If you want to file charges or pursue civil action, I'll represent you pro bono. Elena, the architect, was more emotional. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. We all got these amazing gifts that basically laundered stolen money while you got $10. And the truth? That's so fucked up. Having my cousin's support gave me confidence that I was making the right choice. These were successful, intelligent people who understood the gravity of what my parents had done. Their validation helped me move forward with my plan. The final piece was deciding on the venue for my revelation. I considered several options: confronting my parents privately, sending the evidence to Dad's business partners, or submitting everything to the local newspaper. But ultimately, I chose the setting that felt most appropriate: the next family Sunday dinner at Grandpa's house. My parents had been hosting these dinners since Grandpa's death, apparently planning to maintain the tradition. The irony of exposing their crimes in the house they'd inherited through theft felt poetically appropriate. Plus, having the extended family present would ensure that the truth couldn't be contained or spun into some alternative narrative. I spent the week before the dinner crafting my presentation carefully. This wouldn't be an emotional outburst or a dramatic confrontation. It would be a methodical, documented explanation of what they'd done, how it had affected me, and what I intended to do about it. The night before the dinner, I sat in my workshop now, surrounded by the beautiful pieces I'd restored through honest work. Tomorrow, I would walk into that house not as the family disappointment, but as the granddaughter who'd inherited both the truth and the power to act on it. 28 years of feeling small were about to end. Sunday dinner at Grandpa's house had always followed the same ritual. We'd gather in the living room for cocktails while Mom finished preparing the meal, then move to the dining room for an elaborate spread that showcased her domestic skills. The house felt different now that I knew it was bought with stolen money, every piece of furniture and decoration a reminder of their crime. I arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained my evidence and a small gift bag that held special significance. My parents greeted me with their usual mixture of polite concern and barely concealed disappointment. "Seraphina, you look well," Mom said, kissing my cheek with the practiced affection she'd perfected for social occasions. "I hope you're handling Grandpa's passing okay. I know you were close to him." The pause before close was deliberate, as if my relationship with Grandpa had been somehow inappropriate or excessive. Even now, after everything, she couldn't resist a subtle dig. Dad was mixing his traditional old-fashioned when he glanced at my portfolio. "Bringing work to dinner? That's not very social of you, sweetheart." "Actually, it's family business," I replied, setting the portfolio carefully on the coffee table. "Something Grandpa left for me to share with everyone." My cousins had all arranged to attend virtually again, their faces appearing on the large television screen Dad had mounted for family calls. Jessica was calling from her hospital break room, Marcus from his law office, and Elena from her home studio. They all knew what was coming, but their expressions remained carefully neutral. We made small talk for 20 minutes while Mom put the finishing touches on dinner. She'd prepared Grandpa's favorite meal, pot roast with root vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was honoring a man she'd stolen from while serving his food in his house with his money. "Shall we move to the dining room?" Mom announced, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything's ready." We settled around the familiar table where I'd spent countless Sunday dinners feeling like an outsider. But tonight, I was the one with power, the one with secrets, the one who would control how this evening unfolded. After we'd filled our plates and exchanged the usual pleasantries about work and weather, I cleared my throat. "Actually, before we go any further, I need to share something important with everyone. Something about Grandpa's letter." The room went quiet. My parents' forks paused halfway to their mouths, and I could see the attention of my cousins sharpening on the screen. "You all know that Grandpa left me $10 in his will." I began reaching for my portfolio. "What you don't know is why." I withdrew the first document, a copy of Grandpa's letter, and placed it on the table where everyone could see. He also left me this letter explaining the truth about our family, a truth that's been hidden for 28 years. Mom's face had gone pale. "Seraphina, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about fraud, Mom. I'm talking about the $200,000 you stole from Grandpa to pay for fertility treatments. I'm talking about the forged signatures, the unauthorized credit applications, and the 28 years of lies that followed." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's old-fashioned glass was frozen halfway to his lips, and Mom looked like she'd been slapped. On the screen, my cousins leaned forward, their faces reflecting shock and growing understanding. "I don't know what you think you know," Dad started, but I cut him off. "I know everything," I said, firmly withdrawing the next set of documents. "I have the original credit applications with Mom's forged signature. I have the bank statements showing the unauthorized transactions. I have Mom's own written confession where she begged Grandpa not to expose her crime." I placed each document on the table methodically, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. With each piece of paper, my parents seemed to shrink smaller in their chairs. "This is ridiculous," Mom whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your grandfather was getting old. He was confused about things." "He was confused about nothing," I replied, withdrawing my mother's confession letter. "This is your handwriting, Mom. Your signature. Your admission that you forged Grandpa's name and stole his money because you were desperate for a baby." I began reading aloud from the letter. "Dear Dad, I know what I did was wrong. Forging your signature and using the business credit without permission was inexcusable. I was just so desperate to have a child that I lost all perspective. Please don't call the police. I promise I'll pay back every penny." Mom's hand flew to her mouth and I saw tears forming in her eyes. But I wasn't finished. "Here's the thing, Mom. You never paid back a penny. Instead, you spent the next 28 years treating me like I was some kind of burden, some disappointment that reflected poorly on your family. Do you want to know why?" The room was so quiet I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "Because every time you looked at me, you were reminded of your crime. I wasn't your disappointment. I was your guilty conscience walking around in human form. You made me feel worthless my entire life because I represented the worst thing you'd ever done." Jessica's voice came through the speakers tight with emotion. "Is this real? Did you really steal money from Grandpa Joe?" Dad finally found his voice. "Now wait just a minute. This is ancient history. Whatever happened happened a long time ago, and we've built a good life since then." "Built on what foundation?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "The business you're so proud of, the house you inherited, the money you used to send my cousins to private schools. All of it came from rebuilding what you stole from your own father." I turned to address my cousins on the screen. "Jessica, Marcus, Elena. I need you to understand that every advantage you've had, every family contribution to your education and success came from money your grandparents earned twice. Once before your parents stole it, and again after they forced him to start over." The expressions on my cousins' faces shifted from shock to disgust as the implications sank in. These were ethical people who'd built their careers on integrity, and they were realizing that their family advantages had come from fraud. But more than the money, I continued turning back to my parents. "What breaks my heart is understanding why you've always resented me. I spent my entire childhood thinking I was disappointing you, thinking I wasn't good enough, thinking I was the family failure. But the truth is, you couldn't stand looking at me because I reminded you of what you'd done." Mom was crying openly now, but I felt no sympathy. 28 years of emotional abuse couldn't be erased by tears. "Seraphina, please," she whispered. "We love you. We've always loved you." "Love," I laughed bitterly. "You've spent my entire life making me feel like I was an inconvenience you tolerated. You bragged about my cousin's achievements while treating my work like a hobby. You made me believe I was the problem, when the real problem was your guilt and shame." I reached into my gift bag and withdrew something that made Mom gasp. Her original confession letter, the actual document she'd written 28 years ago. "I brought this tonight as a gift," I said, placing it directly in front of her. "You can keep it. Consider it a memento of the day your lies finally caught up with you." Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "Enough. This is our family, Seraphina. Whatever mistakes were made happened before you were even born. We don't need to destroy everything over ancient history." "Ancient history?" I stood up, feeling more powerful than I'd ever felt in this house. "Dad, you built your entire reputation on being a trustworthy businessman, while your success was funded by fraud. Mom, you've spent years leading the Historical Society, preserving the integrity of local heritage, while your own life is built on lies. You want to talk about destroying everything? You destroyed my childhood with your guilt and resentment." I gathered my documents and placed them back in the portfolio. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop pretending that I'm the family disappointment. You're going to acknowledge that everything you've achieved came at the cost of Grandpa's trust and my emotional well-being. And you're going to live with the knowledge that I have enough evidence to destroy your reputation anytime I choose to use it. The room was silent except for Mom's quiet sobbing and the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. "What do you want from us?" Dad asked quietly. "I want you to leave me alone," I replied. "I want you to stop the passive-aggressive comments, stop the disappointed looks, stop treating me like I'm some kind of family burden. I want you to acknowledge that I've built something honest and real while you've been living off stolen money for 28 years." I picked up my portfolio and headed toward the door, then paused to look back at them one final time. Oh, and one more thing. Grandpa left me more than just that letter. He left me the workshop property and enough money to expand my business into something significant. So the next time you're tempted to look down on my choices, remember that everything I have I earned honestly. Can you say the same? I walked out of that house and never looked back. The aftermath of that Sunday dinner was everything I'd hoped for and more. Within 48 hours, my cousins had all called to express their support and disgust with my parents' behavior. Jessica was particularly vocal about feeling sick that her medical school loans had been paid off with what amounted to laundered, stolen money. "I'm returning the money," she told me during a long phone conversation. I can't build my career on the foundation of their crime against Grandpa Joe. Marcus and Elena feel the same way. True to their word, all three cousins formally rejected their inheritance payments and asked Morrison to redirect the funds to a scholarship foundation in Grandpa's name. Their gesture meant more to me than they could possibly know. It proved that integrity wasn't completely absent from our family gene pool. My parents, meanwhile, went into full damage control mode. Dad called me repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that shifted from anger to bargaining to what sounded like genuine panic. Mom sent a 5-page handwritten letter that was equal parts apology and justification, explaining how desperate they'd been for a child and how sorry they were for how they'd treated me afterward. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source: their social circle. Apparently, Mom had confided in her best friend about the family drama, trying to spin it as an ungrateful daughter, attacking her parents with false accusations. Unfortunately for Mom, her friend happened to be married to a forensic accountant who took one look at the evidence and confirmed that the documents were genuine. Word spread quickly through their country club and social networks. The same people who'd spent years hearing about their disappointing daughter were now learning the truth about the family's financial foundation. Dad's insurance business began losing clients who questioned his integrity, and Mom was quietly asked to step down from her leadership role in the Historical Society. The irony was perfect. Their reputation for respectability built on stolen money and maintained through years of making me feel worthless crumbled as soon as the truth emerged. But the real transformation was in me. Using Grandpa's inheritance, I expanded my workshop into a full restoration studio and hired 2 apprentices. Word of my work spread beyond our small town, and I began receiving commissions from collectors and museums. The business Grandpa had believed in was finally thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. More importantly, I felt free for the first time in my adult life. The weight of family disappointment was gone, replaced by the knowledge that I was exactly who I was supposed to be. Every piece I restored, every apprentice I trained, every satisfied client who appreciated quality craftsmanship validated the path I'd chosen despite my parents' disapproval. 6 months after the dinner confrontation, my parents made one final attempt at reconciliation. They showed up at my workshop unannounced, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen them. Mom had clearly been crying, and Dad's usual confidence was nowhere to be found. "Seraphina, we need to talk," Dad said quietly. "We know we hurt you, and we want to make things right." I looked up from the antique desk I was refinishing, a piece that would soon grace a museum in Boston. What exactly do you want to make right? The 28 years of emotional abuse, or the fact that your crime finally caught up with you? We were wrong, Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. We were so consumed by guilt and fear that we took it out on you. You didn't deserve that. No, I didn't, I agreed. But acknowledging it now doesn't erase the damage. They stood there for a moment, perhaps hoping I'd offer some path back to a relationship. But the truth was, I didn't want them in my life anymore. The revelation of their crime had freed me, not just from their expectations, but from any obligation to maintain a family relationship built on dysfunction and resentment. I think it's best if we keep our distance, I said finally. You have your life, and I have mine. Let's keep it that way. They left without argument, and I haven't spoken to them since. A year later, I received news that Dad's insurance business had been sold to a larger firm, and my parents had moved to Florida, apparently seeking a fresh start where their reputation hadn't been tainted by the truth. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but no sympathy either. They'd made their choices 28 years ago, and the consequences had finally caught up with them. The workshop that Grandpa left me has become everything he believed it could be. I've trained 6 apprentices who've gone on to start their own restoration businesses, and my work has been featured in several design magazines. But more than professional success, I've found peace in knowing that everything I've built is authentic. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd never opened that letter, if I'd accepted the $10 as the final verdict on my worth in the family. I might have spent the rest of my life believing I was the disappointment they'd always made me feel like. Instead, I learned that the people who'd made me feel small were the ones with something to hide. Grandpa Joe's final gift wasn't just the money or the property. It was the truth that set me free from a family dynamic that was never really about me at all. Their treatment of me had everything to do with their guilt and nothing to do with my worth. As I write this, I'm sitting in my expanded workshop surrounded by beautiful pieces that represent honest work and genuine skill. The $10 inheritance turned out to be the most valuable gift I ever received because it came with a letter that changed everything. Looking back on this whole journey, I realized that family revenge isn't always about destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about freeing yourself from their power over you and building something better than they ever imagined you could. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about truth finally setting everyone free. So I have to ask you, have you ever discovered that the people who made you feel small were actually the ones with something to hide? Have you found that family loyalty sometimes protects the wrong people? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of family karma and long overdue justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about how the truth always finds a way to surface. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that they're worth more than their family's expectations. And remember that sometimes the biggest revenge is simply refusing to stay small in a world that benefits from your diminished sense of self-worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family disappointment to personal triumph. Here's to all of us who've learned that our worth was never determined by the people who were too guilty to see it clearly.